On a faraway planet, there was a human man named Matthew. He was young, kind, and always wanted to help others. Matthew came from Earth to join a peacekeeping and medical team on the alien world of Solara. The people of this planet looked different from humans. Their skin had soft colors, some were blue, some green, some even purple, and their eyes glowed in the dark. Matthew was new to their city, but he was always polite and worked hard. The locals found him strange, but some also found him interesting because he tried to understand their ways. One day, the city was full of excitement. There was a big festival, and everyone was outside. People were singing, playing music, and carrying bright lights. Matthew was walking with his medical bag, watching everything. He liked to see the children laugh and dance in the square. He noticed a group of important aliens in the crowd. They wore long robes and walked with guards. He heard someone say that the tall alien with silver hair was the city's leader, and beside him was his daughter, Elia was young, not much older than 16 in human years. Her skin was pale blue, and her eyes were bright purple. She smiled shyly at the children who came to greet her. Matthew watched her for a moment. She seemed nice and gentle. He saw that her father was very proud of her. The people bowed as the leader passed by, and Alira waved at the children, trying to make everyone feel at ease. Suddenly, a loud noise broke the peace. An old tower at the edge of the square started to shake. People shouted and pointed. Matthew looked and saw that part of the tower was falling apart. Stones and metal pieces were coming loose. The guards rushed to protect the leader, but in the chaos, Alira ran towards a little boy who was trapped near the tower's base. Matthew saw her run, and his heart jumped. He dropped his bag and ran after her, the air filled with dust and the sounds of people yelling. Alira tried to pull the boy away from the tower, but some heavy beams blocked their path. Matthew reached them just as a huge stone started to fall from above. He shouted for Alira to get down. Without thinking, he threw himself in front of her and the boy. He pushed both of them away as the stone crashed near his back. Pain shot through his body. Matthew fell to the ground, but he kept pushing Alira and the boy until they were clear from danger. The people watched in shock. Some ran forward to help. Matthew felt dizzy and weak, but he tried to stand up. Alira's father and the guards hurried to them. Alira cried, worried that Matthew was hurt. She held his arm and begged him to stay awake. Matthew smiled weakly and said he was all right, even though he was bleeding from his shoulder. The leader knelt beside him, his face full of worry and respect. He thanked Matthew again and again for saving his daughter's life. Soon, other medics arrived. They carried Matthew on a stretcher, and Alira walked beside him, holding his hand. The crowd watched silently as the medics took him to the city's medical center. The leader spoke to the people, telling them that Matthew had done something very brave. Everyone began to whisper about the human who saved the leader's daughter. Some called him a hero, while others looked at him with new curiosity. Inside the medical center, doctors worked quickly to clean Matthew's wounds and set his shoulder. The technology was different from Earth, but the alien doctors were gentle and skilled. Matthew drifted in and out of sleep, hearing strange voices and feeling strange hands. Sometimes he woke and saw Alira sitting beside him. She brought him water and talked to him in a soft voice. She thanked him for saving her life and said she would never forget his kindness. Matthew blushed and said he was just doing what anyone would do, but Alira shook her head and told him not everyone would have been so brave. As Matthew rested, memories of the rescue played again and again in his mind. He remembered the fear in Alira's eyes, the weight of the falling stone, and the rush of pain. But he also remembered the relief on her face when she realized they were safe. He wondered why he had risked his life for someone he hardly knew. Maybe it was because he could not stand to see someone in danger. Or maybe it was just the right thing to do. Days passed, and Matthew began to heal. The city talked about him all the time. Children came to the window of his room, hoping to catch a glimpse of the human hero. Alien elders sent gifts and flowers. Alira visited every day, telling him stories about her life and her world. Matthew learned about the customs of Solara, about their festivals, and about the duties of their leaders. Illyra listened to Matthew's stories about Earth, about green trees, blue skies, and rain. They both laughed when Matthew tried to speak her language, making funny mistakes. Meanwhile, not everyone was happy. Some people in the city did not trust humans. They said Matthew was an outsider, and they worried that his friendship with Illyra might bring trouble. Some guards whispered that it was dangerous for a human to be so close to the leader's family. But Illyra did not care. She told her father that Matthew was a good person. Her father nodded, but he looked thoughtful and worried. One evening, when the sun set behind the city's shining towers, Illyra's father came to visit Matthew. He brought with him an old book and sat down quietly. After some time, he spoke in a calm, deep voice. He told Matthew that saving someone's life on Solara was not a small thing. He said that, by their oldest customs, a person who saved the life of a leader's family owed a bond that could never be broken. Matthew listened, not sure what that meant. He asked if it was a reward or a debt. The leader smiled sadly and said it was more than either. It was a tie of honor, loyalty, and family. As the night grew darker, Matthew felt a mix of fear and curiosity. He wondered what this bond would mean for his future. He looked at Illyra, who smiled gently at him. Even though he did not know what would come next, Matthew felt that something very important had just started. He closed his eyes, hoping for sleep, and tried to imagine what his new life on Solara might become. In his heart, he hoped he would be able to face whatever was coming, just as he faced the falling tower that day. Matthew woke up slowly, his mind still heavy and foggy. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then he saw the white ceiling above him and remembered the alien doctors and the strange, soft light in the room. His shoulder ached, but it was bandaged, and he could move his arm a little. He looked around and saw flowers, strange fruits, and bright drawings pinned to the wall. Some gifts were from children, some from people he did not know. As Matthew tried to sit up, the door opened quietly. Illyra walked in, carrying a bowl of soup. Her smile was gentle, and she looked less nervous than before. Matthew tried to greet her in her own language, but he made a mistake and used the word for shoes instead of hello. Illyra laughed, a soft and musical sound. She placed the bowl on the table and sat beside him. Lia told Matthew that the whole city was talking about him. She said her father had sent messages of thanks to the human base, and Matthew's friends from the medical team wanted to visit. Matthew felt shy when she praised him, but he was also glad that she was safe. He thanked Illyra for her company and said he was happy to see her smiling again. After breakfast, Illyra's father arrived. His robe was silver and blue, and he looked very serious. 2 guards stood outside the door, watching everyone who came. Near the leader sat beside Matthew and began to speak slowly so Matthew could understand every word. He explained the old custom again. On Solara, if someone saved the life of a family member, especially the child of a leader, the person owed a bond. This bond could never be broken. It was a promise older than the city itself. It meant that Matthew was now part of their family. In a way that could not be changed, Matthew listened carefully. He asked what this bond meant for him. Would he have to leave his old life? Would he have to stay with Illyra's family forever? The leader did not answer right away. He said Matthew would not be forced to do anything, but he hoped Matthew would respect their ways. The bond, he said, was an honor, not a punishment. It meant trust, loyalty, and friendship. Sometimes it meant more. Lir single quotes S mother also came to see Matthew. She brought a long blue scarf and wrapped it around his shoulders. She said this was a sign of welcome and respect. Matthew felt strange wearing it, but Illyra smiled at him and said it suited him. The mother explained that he could not leave the house for a few days for his own safety. There were still people in the city who did not trust humans. Matthew agreed to stay and rest. He was too weak to argue, and he liked having Illyra and her family around. In the days that followed, Matthew learned more about Solara. Illyra brought him books, showed him how to use the city's screens, and even helped him practice their language. Sometimes they went to the roof garden in the evening. They watched the stars together, and Illyra told him about the planets and the constellations. Matthew shared stories from Earth about wild animals, old forests, and mountains. Illyra liked to hear about snow and rain, things that were rare on Scylla. Sometimes Illyra's father would bring important visitors to meet Matthew. They asked him questions about Earth and about why he chose to help people so far from home. Matthew answered honestly. He said he believed all people deserved kindness, no matter where they were from. Some visitors looked thoughtful after talking to him, others still seemed unsure. Matthew tried not to let their stares bother him. He remembered what Illyra had said. Many people on Solara had never met a human before. One afternoon, while Matthew was resting, Illyra came to him with a worried look. She told him that some people in the city did not like the old customs. They thought it was dangerous to let an outsider be so close to the leader's family. Some whispered that Matthew would bring trouble or might even try to use the bond for his own gain. Illyra said she did not believe them, but she wanted Matthew to be careful. Matthew thanked her for the warning and promised to respect her people and their ways. Matthew began to feel better every day. He was allowed to walk around the family house, which was big and full of bright windows. He met Illyra's little brother, who liked to play with a strange ball that floated in the air. The boy taught Matthew a game, and soon they were both laughing. And running in the halls, Illyra watched them and smiled. Matthew started to feel like he belonged in the house. He was still a stranger, but he was not alone. One day, the leader invited Matthew to a special dinner. Many important people were there, dressed in shining robes. The food was bright and full of flavors Matthew had never tasted. After dinner, the leader stood and spoke to everyone. He thanked Matthew in front of the whole room. He said that Matthew was now a part of their family by the bond, and that this bond brought honor to them all. The guests clapped and some even cheered. After the dinner, Matthew and Illyra went to the garden. She thanked him again for saving her life. Matthew looked at her, seeing the gratitude in her eyes, and felt a strange warmth in his chest. He told her that she was brave to try and save the little boy, and that her kindness was what made him want to help. Illyra blushed and looked away, but she smiled. She said she hoped they could be friends for a long time. As the days passed, Matthew's feelings changed. At first, he only wanted to return to his work and his team, but now he found himself thinking about Illyra and her family more and more. He liked being with them, learning from them, and feeling needed. Sometimes he wondered what his friends on Earth would think if they saw him now, wearing a blue scarf and eating alien fruit with people from another world. Not all was peaceful, though. Once, when Matthew was walking in the garden, two men stopped him. They spoke quietly, but their words were not friendly. They told Matthew that he should be careful, that some people would never accept him, no matter what he did. Matthew listened and nodded, not wanting to argue. When he told Illyra about the men, she looked worried but said her family would protect him. The leader called Matthew to his study that night. He asked Matthew if he wanted to go back to his old life. He said Matthew was free to choose. Matthew thought for a long time. He remembered the fear in Illyra's eyes during the accident, the kindness of her family, and the respect they had shown him. He realized he did not want to leave, not yet. He told the leader he wanted to stay and learn more about the bond and what it meant. The leader smiled and placed a hand on Matthew's shoulder. He said Matthew had made a wise choice. He told Matthew that the bond was not just about saving a life, but about joining hearts and families. He said the bond would test Matthew, but it could also give him great happiness. Matthew thanked him and promised to try his best. As the days turned into weeks, Matthew became stronger. He learned to use the city's machines, learned more words in the alien language, and spent many evenings talking with Illyra. Sometimes they walked by the river that ran through the city. Other times they watched plays or listened to music in the square. Everywhere they went, people watched them. Some stared with open curiosity, some with suspicion, but others began to greet Matthew with smiles. Matthew's heart was full of questions, but he felt hope. He did not know what the bond would bring, but he knew he was not alone. He had saved Illyra's life, but maybe she and her family were saving his too, in ways he could not yet understand. Matthew's days slowly found a new rhythm as he lived with Illyra's family. At first, everything had felt strange and unfamiliar, but now he started to wake each morning feeling less like an outsider. Every day brought something new to learn, a new word, a new food, or a custom that surprised him. The bond, he realized, was not just about the promise he made, but about sharing each day and finding trust in each other. In the mornings, Matthew often joined Alira and her brother for breakfast. They would eat sweet bread and fruit that glowed softly in the early light. The boy told stories about his dreams, and Alira teased him gently, her laughter making the house feel warm. Matthew always felt welcome at their table, even though some food still tasted strange to him. He began to enjoy the blue tea Alira made, which tasted like honey and mint. After breakfast, Alira's father sometimes called Matthew into his study. The study was full of old books and screens that showed news from across the planet. The leader asked Matthew to help him understand human ways. He wanted to learn about human governments, medicine, and even small things like sports. Matthew tried to explain with simple words and drew pictures to help. He felt proud when the leader nodded and took notes. Showing that he respected Matthew's ideas, Matthew also tried to learn about Silura's culture. He sat with the elders and listened to their stories. They told him about ancient wars, great peace treaties, and the meaning of the bond in their lives. He learned that the bond had once brought two enemy tribes together. Matthew realized that the bond was more than a promise. It was a living bridge between people. Lir often took Matthew to see the city. They walked along wide streets lined with flowers and glowing lights. She showed him the library, the market, and the grand hall where leaders met. Sometimes children would follow them, pointing at Matthew and asking him questions. He answered with patience, and their curiosity made him smile. Alira was proud to show her city, and Matthew was glad to see it through her eyes. At night, Matthew and Alira would sit on the roof garden and talk quietly. Alira told him about her worries. She said her father wanted her to learn about leading the city. She was afraid she would not be strong enough. Matthew listened and tried to comfort her. He said she was already brave and kind, and that people followed her because she cared for them. Alira blushed and thanked him for his words. She told him that having someone to trust made her feel less alone. Not everyone was happy about Matthew's presence. In the market, he sometimes heard people whisper about him. They called him the bonded human, and some even called him outsider. Some believed Matthew would bring bad luck or change their ways too much. Matthew tried not to let it bother him, but sometimes he felt lonely. Only Alira and her family made him feel like he belonged. Rumors about Matthew and the bond started to spread. Some people said the bond would make Matthew and Alira family forever. Others joked that they would be married one day. Matthew was embarrassed by this talk, but Alira only laughed. She told Matthew not to worry about rumors. She said people liked to gossip, but only time would tell what the bond really meant. One day, the leader called a meeting in the grand hall. Matthew was asked to join. He wore his blue scarf and sat beside Alira. Many leaders and elders were there, and the hall was filled with bright banners. The leader spoke about the bond and Matthew's bravery. He told the people that Matthew was an honored guest and that the bond would help their city grow strong. Some people cheered, but few elders looked worried. During the meeting, Matthew felt the weight of many eyes on him. He walked through the city with Alira, and she could see that he was troubled. She told him that it was not easy to be different, but that she was glad he stayed. Matthew smiled and said he would not leave her side, no matter how hard things became. Alira looked at him for a long time, her eyes full of trust. Trouble began one evening when Matthew was out in the garden. A stranger approached him. The stranger wore a hood and spoke in a low voice, warning Matthew that some people wanted him gone. Matthew asked why, and the stranger said that some families feared the bond would give Matthew too much power, or that humans would soon control the city. Matthew tried to explain that he had no such wish, but the stranger only shook his head and left quickly. When Matthew told Alira about the meeting, she became worried. She said some families had always wanted more power for themselves. She asked Matthew to be careful and stay close to her family. Matthew agreed and promised not to take any risks, Still, life inside the house was peaceful. Matthew grew close to Alara's little brother, playing games and helping him with homework. He also became friends with some of the servants, learning to cook small meals and taking care of the garden. Matthew liked feeling useful, and he enjoyed the simple chores. Every evening, he talked with Alara's father about Earth, and they shared stories of leaders from both worlds. As the days went by, Matthew wondered more about what the bond truly meant. He asked Alira's father, who explained that the bond could mean different things for each family. For some, it was only friendship. For others, it became a deep tie, sometimes even leading to marriage. The leader told Matthew that the bond was not forced, but that it was meant to bring people together in trust and respect. Matthew began to see that the bond was changing him. He felt less afraid and more at home. He wanted to help Alira and her family. He wanted to protect them as they had protected him. Sometimes he wondered if he would ever return to Earth, but each day, the answer seemed less important. One evening, as Matthew sat with Alira on the roof, she asked him if he missed his old life. Matthew thought for a moment, then said he did. Miss his friends, the green trees and the rain, but he was glad he came to Solara. He said he felt like he belonged here now. Alira smiled and said she was glad too. As the sun set and the city lights came on, Matthew and Alira watched in silence. Both felt the bond between them grow stronger. It was more than a custom or a rule. It was something they both chose, something they wanted to keep. In the city below, people talked and wondered about the human and the leader's daughter. Some still doubted, but others began to hope that this new bond could bring peace and new understanding. For Matthew, each day was a step toward a new life, one he had never imagined but now wanted with all his heart. Trouble came to Solara on a night that seemed quiet at first. Matthew could feel something was wrong before anyone else. He heard whispers in the hallways of the house. Guards spoke in low voices, and even the servants moved quickly with worried faces. Alira noticed it too. She asked her father if everything was all right, but he only said that there were problems outside the house. Matthew saw the worry in the leader's eyes, and he knew that something serious was happening. That evening, Alira's father called the whole family and Matthew to his private room. He said that some enemies were planning to attack the house. These enemies were not strangers. They were from powerful families in the city who did not like the bond between Matthew and Alira's family. They thought Matthew was a weakness or even a danger. The leader said that the guards would protect the family, but everyone needed to be careful. Matthew listened quietly. He remembered the warning from the stranger in the garden. Now he saw that the danger was real. He looked at Alira and saw that she was scared, but she tried to be brave. She held her little brother's hand and promised him that everything would be fine. Matthew sat beside Alira and told her he would not let anything happen to her or her family. The night was long and full of worry. Guards walked through the halls, checking doors and windows. Matthew could not sleep, so he sat by the window, watching the dark city. He wondered if he had made things worse for Alira and her family just by being there. He wanted to protect them, but he was only one person. He did not know how to fight, but he promised himself he would do his best. Near midnight, there was a loud noise outside the house. Matthew saw shadows moving by the wall. The guards shouted and ran to the doors. Matthew's heart pounded in his chest. He rushed to find Alira and her brother. He found them in the main room with their parents and some guards. The leader was giving quiet orders to the guards. Matthew tried to keep calm for Alira and the boy. Suddenly, someone tried to break down the side door. The guards ran to stop them, but a few attackers got inside. Matthew saw men with dark clothes and angry faces. The attackers tried to reach the family, but the guards fought back. Matthew looked for something to help. He grabbed a heavy vase and used it to block a door. When a guard was pushed down, Matthew ran to help him, pulling him away from danger. Elia and her brother hid behind a table with their mother. Matthew went to them and told them to stay low. An attacker saw them and tried to rush at them, but Matthew stood in front of Alira. The attacker shouted in their language, calling Matthew an outsider who should not be there. Matthew did not move. He picked up a long stick from the floor and held it in front of him. The attacker tried to push Matthew aside, but Matthew fought back. He used the stick to keep the attacker away from Illyra and her brother. He shouted for help, and soon a guard came and helped him. Together they pushed the attacker back toward the door. Matthew was scared, but he did not run. He kept standing in front of Illyra until the last attacker was gone from the room. Outside, more guards arrived, and soon the attackers ran away. Some were caught, but others escaped into the city. The house was safe again, but everyone was shaken. The leader checked on his family, hugging Illyra and her brother. He thanked Matthew for his bravery. The guard said that without Matthew's help, the attackers might have reached the family. Matthew felt tired and sore, but he was glad everyone was safe. After the attack, the city was full of talk. Many people were shocked that someone would attack the leader's house. Some said it was because of the bond with Matthew, but others said it was just because of jealousy and old rivalries. Some people who had doubted Matthew before now respected him. They said he was brave, and he had stood with the family when it mattered most. Lir could not sleep after the attack. She went to the garden with Matthew. She told him that she was scared of the future. She said she felt the pressure to become a good leader, but sometimes she did not feel strong enough. Matthew listened and told her that being afraid was normal. He said real courage was not the absence of fear, but doing what was right even when afraid. Illyra thanked him and said she was glad to have him by her side. The next morning, people in the city started coming to the house with gifts and messages of support. Some leaders who had stayed silent before now came to thank Matthew for his bravery. They told him that his actions had shown real loyalty to Illyra's family. The bond was no longer just a rule or a custom. Now people saw it as something real. An important Lir single quotes S father spoke to the city's council. He told them that the attack had failed because his family was united, and because they had good friends, even human ones. He asked the council to look past old fears and to think about the future. Some council members were still unsure, but many began to see Matthew in a new way. Matthew became a symbol of trust between humans and the people of Solara. As the days passed, life slowly returned to normal. Guards still watched the house, but the fear faded. Matthew helped with repairs around the house, fixing broken windows and cleaning up the mess from the attack. Illyra helped too, and they laughed together as they worked. Her little brother followed them everywhere, pretending to be a hero with a wooden sword. One afternoon, Illyra told Matthew about her dreams for the future. She wanted peace between all families and people. She wanted her city to be safe for everyone, even strangers. Matthew said he believed it was possible. He said that if people could learn to trust each other, they could make a new world. Illyra smiled and said she hoped the bond would help make that dream come true. One evening, Illyra's father called Matthew to his study. He told Matthew the full truth about the bond. He said it was a promise to protect and care for the family, but it was also a tie that could become something deeper. Sometimes the bond led to marriage or made someone a true member of the family. The leader said that Matthew could choose his own path, but that the family would always honor the bond between them. Matthew thought about this for a long time. He realized that he already cared deeply for Illyra and her family. They were his friends, his home, and maybe one day his true family. He decided that he would do whatever he could to protect them and help their city. As the stars filled the sky that night, Matthew and Illyra walked in the garden. They talked about everything they had seen and done since Matthew first came to Solara. They both knew that hard times might come again, but they were not afraid. Together they were stronger. Together they could face anything. Matthew woke before the sun rose, his heart heavy with the news he had received. Illyra's father had summoned him quietly the night before. Another group had moved against the city, a council of families who felt threatened by the old customs and the new bond. They wanted to seize power, to break the promise that Matthew had made. Matthew dressed in simple clothes and found Illyra waiting for him. She looked pale in the dim light, but her eyes were strong. He took her hand and squeezed it gently, and she nodded. They both knew what they must do. As dawn spread its soft glow, Matthew and Illyra walked through the corridors of the family house. Guards were sharpening weapons, checking shields, and studying plans drawn on glowing screens. Matthew had seen war only in books and training, not real battle. Yet he felt a deep sense of duty. Illyra's father met them in the main hall. He laid out the map of the city and the nearby lands. The council's forces were gathering on the east road, led by a powerful noble named Garin. They had soldiers on beasts and ships ready in the river. They hoped to surround the city and starve it into submission. Matthew studied the map and then spoke. He suggested using small groups of agile fighters to disrupt the council's supply lines. He had learned from human tactics how to use surprise, speed, and knowledge of the land. Illyra listened carefully and added that the river forests had secret paths known only to her people. She and her brother had explored those as children. They could guide small teams through the forest to strike quickly and vanish. The leader nodded, impressed by Matthew's ideas and his bond with the family. Soon, Matthew found himself leading a small unit of guards and volunteers. He felt the weight of their trust. Illyra stayed in the house, helping to prepare defenses and tend to the wounded. Matthew and the fighters slipped into the forest at dawn. The trees of Solara were tall and graceful, their leaves glowing softly under the morning light. Branches arched overhead, creating tunnels of green. Matthew moved quietly, his senses alert. He thought of Illyra's face, her hope and her fear. He knew he must do well, or the bond they shared could be broken by loss. They reached the first supply camp along the river. Guards stood around crates of food and weapons. Matthew signaled and the fighters rushed in. The air filled with shouts and the clash of steel. Matthew grabbed a crate of supplies and flung it into the water. It splashed, sending fish scattering in silver arcs. The attackers panicked and the fighters seized the moment. They tied some guards and freed others they found chained. Then they slipped away before the camp's main force could regroup. Matthew's heart raced, but the plan had worked. He led them back through the trees, leaving the enemy off guard. Lyra waited by a low fire in the forest clearing where the group met her. She ran to Matthew and hugged him, relief and pride in her eyes. His uniform was torn and his face had scratches, but he was smiling. Illyra tended to a shallow cut on his cheek, her hands gentle. Matthew told her who they had freed and how the supply lines were broken. Illyra's brother jumped up and down, excited by the victory, and Matthew laughed at the boy's energy. For a moment, they forgot the war and were just friends enjoying a small triumph. Over the next days, Matthew and Illyra's people struck again and again. They used hit-and-run tactics, night raids on enemy camps, cutting off bridges, sending false messages to sow confusion. Matthew studied each victory and learned from each mistake. He saw how the bond had changed him. He felt more at home on Solara than he had ever felt on Earth. The fighters respected his courage and his care for all life. Many began to believe that the bond between Matthew and the leader's family had a power beyond any custom. Inside the city walls, Illyra worked tirelessly. She organized healers and volunteers, making sure the wounded had care. She spoke to the council in the Grand Hall, urging them to stop the fighting and seek peace. Some council members listened to her words, but others shook their heads. Illyra remained calm, her voice steady. She showed them Matthew's reports and maps of the raids. Slowly, the council realized that the families who had supported the attack were losing resources and respect. Illyra's speeches gave people hope. As the council's forces weakened, Matthew led the final strike. They moved under a moonless sky and surrounded Garen's main camp. The council's soldiers were tired, their supplies gone. Matthew and the fighters called out to them, offering mercy if they would surrender. They promised that no one would be harmed if they laid down their arms. At first, Garen's men hesitated, but when the gates opened, hundreds of soldiers came out, dropping their weapons. Matthew walked among them, reminding them that the bond was meant to protect life, not to cause more death. The next morning, the city celebrated in the square. Matthew and Illyra stood side by side before the crowd. The leader's father spoke to the people of Solara. He praised Matthew's bravery and Illyra's wisdom. He said that the bond between a human and his family had saved their city from ruin. The crowd cheered. Matthew felt tears in his eyes as he looked at Alira. He knew they had done something important together. In the days that followed, repairs began. Matthew helped rebuild walls, clear rubble, and plant new trees along the riverbanks. Alira helped too, and they worked side by side. The city felt alive again, full of hope and possibility. Children waved at Matthew and Alira as they passed. People greeted them warmly, showing a new respect for the bond. One evening, Matthew and Alira stood on the balcony of the leader's house. The city lights glowed below like a sea of stars. Alira took Matthew's hand. She said that she had a gift for him. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a simple ring made of silver and pale blue stone. She slipped it onto Matthew's finger. He looked at the ring and then into Alira's eyes. She told him that the ring was a sign of the bond they shared. It showed that he was part of her family. Matthew felt his heart fill with joy and wonder. He took the ring and held it gently. He knew that he owed his life to Alira and her family, and now he chose to owe them more. He slid the ring onto his finger fully and smiled at Alira. She leaned and kissed his cheek softly. They stood together in silence, watching the city they had helped save. Matthew thought of his life on Earth, of his friends and the medical team he had left behind. He knew he might never return, but he didn't feel sadness. He felt a sense of purpose. He had found a new home, a new family, and a new bond that could not be broken. As he looked at Alira, he knew that together they would face whatever came next. Their bond was more than a promise. It was love and loyalty, growing stronger with each day. And so, Matthew and Alira stood together, ready to meet the future. The city below them was alive with possibility, and the bond between them shone like a bright light in the dark. Matthew knew that he had chosen the right path, and he felt a deep peace in his heart. He would never forget the day he saved Alira's life, but now he would remember the many days he spent building a bond that could not be broken. Matthew woke to the soft sound of birds singing outside his window. He lay still for a moment, remembering the day before when the city celebrated his victory. He reached out and saw the silver ring on his finger. It gleamed in the morning light, a quiet reminder of the bond he shared with Alira's family. He smiled and sat up slowly. His body ached, but his heart felt light. He dressed in simple clothes and walked to the courtyard. Guards stood at attention, their faces respectful. Some bowed as he passed. Alira was waiting for him beside a fountain. Her eyes were bright and warm. She waved and beckoned him to join her. Matthew walked across the smooth stones and sat on the edge of the fountain. Water trickled softly, and the air smelled of flowers. Lir brought 2 cups of tea made from sweet herbs. She handed one to Matthew. They drank quietly, watching the water swirl. Then Alira spoke. She said she wanted Matthew to meet the council that morning. Matthew nodded. He wanted to help the city find peace after the war. Alira's voice was gentle but firm. She said it was time for the bond to show its true power. Together, they walked through the city gates. The streets were alive with people waving and smiling. Vendors offered them gifts of fruit and bread. Children ran ahead, playing and shouting Matthew's name. Matthew felt a warmth in his chest. He looked at Alira and saw her pride in his face. They reached the grand hall where the council gathered. The doors were wide open, and sunlight lit the high ceilings. Matthew and Alira stepped inside. Around a long table, the leaders of the city sat in silence. At the head of the table was the leader, Alira's father. He rose when they entered. Matthew bowed his head slightly in respect, and Alira took her seat beside him. The head counselor, a wise elder with silver hair, spoke first. He thanked Matthew for his bravery and for helping Solara in its time of need. He said the bond had shown that trust and loyalty could bridge worlds. Other council members added their words, praising Matthew's courage and Alira's wisdom. Then Alira stood and spoke. Her voice was clear and steady. She told the council how Matthew had saved her life and how their bond had grown. She spoke of hope, of new friendships between humans and Silurians, and of a future built on trust. Matthew listened, feeling both shy and proud. When Illyra finished, he stood and addressed the council. He spoke in simple words in their language. He said he had come to Solara to heal bodies and to bring peace. He said he had found a new family here and that he wished to stay and serve their people. He said the bond was not a burden, but a gift. The council listened in silence. Some nodded slowly, and others looked thoughtful. After a moment, the head counselor stood again. He declared that Matthew was now an official member of the city with the rights and duties of any citizen. He said that from that day forth, humans and Silurians would work together as equals. The hall filled with applause. Matthew felt tears in his eyes. He bowed to the council and to Eliad outside, the city prepared for a feast. Long tables were set up in the square, covered with colorful cloths. People brought food, music, and decorations. Illyra and Matthew walked through the crowd, greeting friends and strangers alike. Matthew tasted new dishes and learned to eat with his fingers, as many Silurians did. He laughed when he dropped a piece of fruit, and Illyra helped him clean up. Music began, and dancers in bright costumes moved through the square. Matthew watched in wonder. Illyra took his hand and led him into the dance. At first Matthew stumbled, but he soon found the rhythm. They moved together, laughing and spinning. The people cheered, and the children danced around them. As night fell, lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over the city. Matthew and Illyra sat on a low wall, holding hands. Illyra leaned against him and asked if he was happy. Matthew looked at the lanterns, at the faces of the people he had come to love, and at Illyra. He smiled and said he was happier than he had ever been. In the days that followed, Matthew settled into his new life. He joined the council's advisors, sharing ideas on medicine and peacekeeping. He taught children in schools, telling stories of Earth and listening to stories of Solara. He worked in the healing halls, treating patients and training new medics. Every day he wore the silver ring and the blue scarf as signs of his bond. Lia continued her duties, learning from her father and growing into her role as a future leader. She and Matthew met each evening in the garden. They shared tea, dreams, and hopes. They spoke of the bond and what it meant to them. Illyra said she felt stronger with Matthew by her side. Matthew said he felt whole in her company. One afternoon, Matthew received a message from his old team on Earth. They asked how he was and if he wanted to return. Matthew smiled, thinking of green trees and blue skies. He wrote back that he was safe and happy, that he had found a new home and a new purpose. He told them he might send news from time to time, but for now, he belonged to Solara. As the seasons changed, the city grew stronger. Humans began to arrive as visitors and traders. Matthew welcomed them, showing them the customs and the people he loved. He helped build schools where both humans and Silurians learned together. The bond became a symbol across the planet, proof that different worlds could come together in friendship and love. One clear morning, Matthew and Illyra climbed a hill outside the city. From there, they could see the towers, the river, and the forests beyond. Illyra took Matthew's hand and said she wanted to name the hill Bond Hill. She said it would remind everyone of the promise they made. Matthew agreed and taught her to say the words in his language. They laughed together as they shared the new name. Of the sky. They made their own small promise, to stand by each other, to protect each other, and to build a future together. They spoke the words in both languages, their voices soft in the morning air. Then they sat and watched the sunrise, feeling the warmth of a new day. Matthew thought of his journey, the day he saved Illyra, the bond that followed, the battles he fought, and the love he found. He reached for Illyra's hand and held it tight. She leaned her head on his shoulder. They were partners, friends, and family. And so, on a world far from Earth, a human man found his purpose and his heart. The bond that could not be broken had become the bond they chose, stronger than any rule. And with that bond, they faced the future together, hopeful and united.